monotheism. So the purpose of life is indeed the worship of God. Now, what does it mean to worship God? Here too, the Muslims have a different definition of worship. When I say the word worship, I bet you the first picture you have in mind is what? Who can tell me the first picture you have in mind when I say worship? Pray, prostrate, bow down to. No doubt, that is worship. Nobody's denying that. But in Islam, the concept of worship is broader than that. Yes, prayer is a very important type of worship. No doubt. In fact, in one prophetic narration, he said, prayer is the gist or the essence of worship. The one whom you pray to, you invoke. When I say pray here, I mean call out to for your needs. Okay, you're invoking. This is the essence of worship because no single act better illustrates the relationship between the worshipper and the object of his worship than prayer. Because you pray to the being whom you love and loves you. You pray to the being whom you know has the power to give you what you want. You pray to the being whom you know cherishes you. You pray to the being who you know hears you, sees you, knows you, cares about you. Therefore, the one whom you pray to, that is the one whom you have made a God. That is your God. So no doubt, you're right, prayer is the gist of worship, even in Islam. But it is not the only manifestation of worship. Worship is far broader. It encompasses many, many, many facets of our life. So much so that smiling in the face of a person whom you greet is an act of worship. Helping your brother, in one narration the Prophet said, when you take water from the well, this is the most common chore that people would do, right? In our times it's a very heavy chore, nobody does it. If anybody had to do it, it would be a very difficult chore. You go to the well and you pull water out. That is not something we want to do. In those days they'd have to do that 20, 30, 40 times a day. He said to pull water from that well and then to pour your bucket into your brother's bucket. You give him that water. This is an act of worship as well. To remove some substance that's irritating people, to remove basically to clean the road, to remove that litter from the road is an act of worship, an act of charity. So you see, the concept of worship is also different in Islam. Being good to human beings is one of the best acts of worship. And here is where the Islamic definition of worship is again radically different than many other, not all, some other religions say, but many other religions. In that, for the Muslim, there are acts of worship that are due to God, such as prayer, fasting, sacrifice. And that is the most important. And then there are acts of worship that you can do for the sake of God, but yes, your fellow men are involved. Primary amongst them is to be good to your parents. This is the highest level of servitude that you show to any human being. No human being has the level that your parents do in Islam. And then obviously to your spouse, your children, your brothers and sisters, fellow men. And then there's also acts of worship that you do for yourself. You take care of your body even, and that is an act of worship. There are three, if you like, spheres of worship between you and God, with your fellow man, and with yourself. And in Islam, you have to perfect all three. If a person were to perfect only one of these three, they're falling short. And this is where we would disagree with many humanists, secular or religious, who claim the purpose of creation is to be good to man. No, this is not the ultimate purpose of creation. The ultimate purpose of creation is to worship God. And worshiping God, one of the manifestations of that worship is to be good to your fellow men. Yes, but to restrict this to being good to men, you are neglecting the rights of God. If somebody were to show you a favor, and instead of repaying him back, you repay somebody else back, that's not very nice. The one who has created you, the one who has given you all that you have, to reject him, to neglect him, to not care about him, it doesn't matter if you do other acts of good. They will be rewarded, nobody's saying they won't be, but you have forfeited his pleasure by ignoring and neglecting him. So the greatest act of worship, no doubt, is the worship of God himself. Then after that, a part of worship is to help your fellow men. And in this regard, any act of charity, any act of good that brings about good to mankind is an act of worship. In one prophetic tradition, the Prophet is reported to have said, the best of people are those who benefit the people the most. The best of people are those who benefit the people most. Meaning, once you do believe in God and you are a righteous person in your daily life, if you want to excel over others, you need to be good to your fellow men. So the concept of monotheism is different in Islam, and the concept also of worship is also different. One more aspect, and that is that, and then we'll open the floor for Q&A and for a discussion, and that is, one thing about Islam that many people simply don't understand is that we also believe one manifestation of worship is to submit to the laws of God. We believe that Islam is not just dry theology, not just cut and paste, believe in this, believe in that, believe in this, believe in that. No. We believe that the one who created us is the only one who can really and truly tell us how to live our lives. Nobody is better qualified to tell us what to do and what not to do, what to eat and what not to eat, how to marry and divorce, how to leave our inheritance, how to live our national, international lives than God. And this is where the concept of separating the church and state, for example, the Muslims, as I'm sure by now all of you know, the Muslims believe that our lives are governed by God. There is no separation in that sense, that I live my life according to the laws of God. I render unto Caesar's what is Caesar's, I render unto God what is God's, but there should be no contradiction between the two. They have to go hand in hand, because Caesar is but a servant of God. And so when the commandment of Caesar goes against the commandment of my God, that is where obviously issues arise. I have to live my life according to the laws of God. Now, one manifestation of worship, as we said, is to submit to those laws. Therefore, for the Muslim, a Muslim believes that a true religion has to not just be cut and dry theology, but also it has to be a system of governance, a system of ethics, of morality. The one who tells us who he is must also tell us what is moral and immoral, what is ethical and what is unethical. And in fact, it is a logical consequence of a God being a God. Nobody is more, when I say buddy here, I mean nobody meaning no being. Perhaps not the wisest thing to use when you're referring to God, but no being is more qualified to dictate to us how to live our lives. Man cannot even judge himself. And we all see for ourselves what happens when the majority, quote-unquote, doctrines rule. Many of you who are practicing Christians, you all know what happens when, for example, with abortion, with other issues that we all feel very strongly about. Even men are not qualified to judge themselves, because the people who become in charge, as we all know very well, that power gets to them. And they start abusing and misusing that power. It's just only natural. And that is why in Islam, the concept of a government, it's a very different concept. The laws are already up and running. The laws are already there. The laws have been revealed. It's a very different system of government. Because the government is not there to take power for itself. The government is there to make sure that the laws that are already there are implemented. And that is where a radical difference occurs as well. Now, of course, this leads us to the issue of Muslim minorities living in lands such as America. That is a separate topic, and I just gave a talk recently, I'll be giving a talk again tonight, where I say in all honesty that yes, we are a minority in this country, therefore these views have to remain theoretical. We must respect the law of the land. We have to understand that our rights here are rights as citizens. We're not expecting to implement our laws internationally or nationally, but within the realm of my personal life, the Constitution guarantees the freedom for me to be religious in my personal life, and that is what we want to do. And that's something we're talking about on a pragmatic or a civic level, if you like, but I'm talking about the theoretical level. Theoretically, a religion should provide not just theology, but also ethics and morality and an entire legal frame of mind. All of that comes part and parcel with the concepts of monotheism and the concepts of worship. So with that, if there are any questions of discussion, any issues that I can help clarify, I don't need it to be written down. If you want to write it, that's fine. If you want to ask it, that's fine as well. Yes, in the back. Okay, yeah. Go ahead.
An earlier speaker referred to this commandment, thou shalt have no other gods before me. The Quran quotation you gave earlier said that Allah is the only, I'll paraphrase it, Allah is the only God worthy of worship. In both statements, I would read an implication that each religion recognizes that there are other gods, they're just not worthy of worship. Would you agree with that?
That's a very profound question. The response to this is, there are many gods that are worshipped by men, but none of those gods deserves to be a god. So what is a god? And again, this all goes back to semantics, to definitions. What is a god? Again, I don't know the Merriam-Webster dictionary, the definition, so I can't quote it, but I'll tell you from an Islamic perspective. A god is a person or even a concept or a thing that is shown veneration, that is shown worship. Any object that is shown worship becomes a god. Now, whether it's worthy of worship or not is a separate issue. Okay? But an idol is a god. In Islam, we would call it an ilah, which is a god. We would call it a god. But does that idol deserve to be a god? No. So the meaning of our testimony, there is no being that is worthy of being worshipped other than God, other than Allah. So there are many gods, if you like, small g's. There are many gods out there, but none of them deserves to be a god. None of them is worthy of that status other than the one true God. Does that answer your question? Okay, we'll take one question from here. I guess we'll alternate between one written and one thing. Yeah, when I said a manifestation of worship is sacrifice, what do you mean? I didn't mean human sacrifice or something of this nature. I meant that, I should have clarified here because the word sacrifice has very different connotations in different religions. What I meant was that for Muslims, when we kill an animal to eat it, goats, sheep, whatever you eat, whatever animal you eat, we're not allowed to take the life of that animal. That life is sacred. We don't have the right to take the life of that animal unless we mention the name of God. So we have to consecrate. It's very similar to kosher laws where, you know, the rabbi has to come and he has to bless, if you like. He has to say, God, I'm doing this for you. I mean, I don't have the right to take this life unless you have given me this right. And we Muslims believe God has created animals for us in that sense, that He has given us the blessings to eat their meat. But I don't have the right to take that animal's life without mentioning God's name. And so to sacrifice an animal for the sake of God, meaning that I mention His name, this is an act of worship. To sacrifice an animal without mentioning God's name, that's sinning. You're taking a life without any reason. So that's what I meant. I hope that clarifies the point that I need to clarify. What does it mean to sacrifice in Islam? Any questions from the floor? Oh yes, go ahead.
Well, I would just, in terms of Islam and other religions, there's a concept, at least in you know, I think other world religions, the idea of spirituality, and that, you know, there's a way that God moves and is and has God's being among us. How do you see the life of the Spirit operating in Islam?
The word spirit, once again, we need to define what do you mean by spirit. There is a spirit that is inherent in every single one of us. We call it a soul. And we believe that God created man in body and in soul. We have a physical body and we have something, call it inside of us, or even though we don't know what the dimensions of, you know, we don't know whether it's inside or outside, but we have something called a soul, a spirit that God has given to every single human being. And life and death is the entering and exiting of that spirit. When the spirit leaves the body becomes a corpse. It's the whole point of what life and death is. So if you're referring to that spirit, obviously this is given to all of us. And God says in the Quran that when He created Adam from clay, that was the body, He then blew of His spirit into Adam. So there is something about this spirit that has a connection with God. And that's why we believe that God takes care of us both in body and in soul. The one who provides our food and drink and air will also provide for our spiritual needs as well. That's the purpose of it.
La ilaha illallah. Allah, there's only one God and